Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
You're watching Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Now today, millions of Americans will head to the polls in person, adding their ballots to the more than 100 million already cast by early voters. We're going to be looking at the US elections in just a little bit, but first let's turn our attention to what's happening locally in news. Now, Parliament's Public Accounts Committee can now resume its functions with the naming of 12 new members, namely 3 months. This is after, I think, 3 months since the appointment of the chairperson. So the Speaker announced the appointments today, and hopefully we can see the resumption of the very important duties of the Public Accounts Committee.
Yeah, Melissa, and I think this is going to be part of our discussion about the US as well. The resilience of institutions, democratic institutions need to function, and, there might be extraordinary circumstances, but the overall system works because things hold up under pressure. And because we've had an extraordinary year, we've had a change of government, we've had the pandemic, and in ways that, really weren't anticipated. And so, the fact that some normalcy is returning to parliamentary business, we have now a full session, though this week it is shortened.
Half-day sessions.
Yeah, nevertheless, we're all grateful because, we've had very little of Parliament for much of the year, and that's not good, especially in a crisis. You want more heads coming together rather than fewer to resolve the issues. And this country is full of talent, and consultation should really be the basis of a business, political business in the country.
Yeah, so not having a functioning public accounts committee since March 9th has been an issue. I think not a single PAC proceeding has been conducted since then. Up to August 18th, the committee has only managed to meet 9 times. If you compare that to previous years, they met around 60 times. Again, in a year where so much has happened, where scrutiny is most needed, I think not having a public accounts committee has really not served the public, I think.
Yeah, and just following on that conversation, referring to a conversation we had just last night about the proposals and counter proposals available in Parliament, the negotiation that's going on because of a government that has a very slim majority, perhaps a little anxious around that, and the federal opposition, of course, not a solid bloc themselves, but with very many factions, saying that they are putting proposal on the table that confidence and supply agreement, which actually would have been a bartering kind of situation, right? A negotiation between the government of the day and the federal opposition in order to achieve common goals, but with the understanding that by, the net result would be a stable government and the ability for these bills to pass. So today we had news, at least coming from the Berita National side, that they're not interested in that. They really don't want to see that one of the planks of that barter would have been allocations for opposition MPs, the equal allocations of opposition MPs. Now that has been rejected by Berita National. Berita National, of course, is not the government, as it were, in power. The Perikatan National government is, but Berita National supports the Perikatan National.
Well, if I may refine that a little bit earlier, it was rejected specifically by UMNO Supreme Council member Tajuddin Abdul Rahman. He said that if the proposal to provide equal monetary allocations to opposition MPs in return for their support for Budget 2021, if that is accepted, then, to quote him, he says, it amounts to killing BN. If I may quote him, he says, we don't agree. Why should we give it to them? It would kill us. Previously, when Pakatan Harapan ruled, they didn't give it to us either, end quote. And I think that's very important. He doesn't quite explain, Sharaad, what it means to kill us. What would the killing entail? I mean, why would it kill us?
I think one of the things that we talk a lot about the show is the political culture that we've had over the last 50 years under Berita National, much of it under Berita National, because the last 2 years we had the Pakatan Harapan government. But it is this sense that politics is a winner-take-all type of game in Malaysia. And so when you win, you don't have to concede anything to the other side. And this includes votes, not giving allocations that don't go to the MPs personally, it goes to their constituents. But by, as it was, starving out your rivals, those rivals can't gain any political capital from doing constituency work or funding, or I don't know, whatever it is that the constituency might need. So there is this rather, you might call it primitive approach to politics, the winner-take-all approach, which is the logic that I think underscores this particular statement.
All right. Well, but we've been talking, particularly on this show, and there's been so much talk about bipartisanship, true bipartisanship, reaching across the aisle to work for, as many of the politicians have said, for the sake of the rakyat. And I'm wondering, where is that? Is it just a platitude said by politicians that they are, working for unity for the rakyat? Or is it really about political capital and, the tug of war of power?
Indeed, Melissa. The question, of course, is that if voters are not watching what's happening, if they're not attentive to the politics of the day, then they're unlikely to vote in ways that punish or reward politicians who have either progressive views on politics or those who take a much more kind of reactionary position. And so, again, it comes back to something that we're going to be talking about with regard to the American elections, which is that voter enthusiasm.
Yes, I have to ask you, Sharaad, do you think there's actually fatigue of the local politics, that people are actually more interested in watching what's happening with the presidential race in the US?
Well, I suspect that's something that's confined to the chattering classes like us, rather than a general issue with Malaysians. But the question of, politics is always going to be part of a spectator sport. The question is, how much do you want to get involved? And a lot of mature democracies have very low voter turnout. This way, this American election is going to buck that trend. It's going to show what has been a historic number of people participating in a pandemic year. A year where many countries have called off elections, and in Malaysia we have people who want to call off elections, and a lot of people who are scared of elections. And yet here is a country that is really, valuing its own democratic traditions and its political freedoms, and saying, well, we'll make it work for us. And, we see that in the many innovative strategies that have been put in place to allow for safe voting in America.
Yes, definitely. We're going to be touching on that. Particularly what I think most interesting is the fact that of all the early votes that have come in, what this means is that more people have voted in advance of election day than on it. And this is going to be a very interesting election to watch. We're going to take a quick break here on Consider This, but after this we'll come back and turn our attention to the US presidential race. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
COVID-19 masih belum berakhir. Dalam kita berusaha memutuskan rantaian wabak ini, kita jangan terpedaya dengan virus maklumat palsu. Simak fakta melalui www.astroawani.com atau aplikasi Astro Awani. Teruskan berdisiplin, ratakan lengkungan pandemik ini.
The third wave of COVID-19 has taken us by storm. There's no room to take anything lightly. Everyone must follow all the steps to stop the spread of COVID-19. Social distancing, face masks, follow these steps, this SOP with the utmost discipline. Together, we can flatten the curve.
Perang COVID-19 tetap belum berakhir. Pastikan setiap langkah berjaga-jaga diamalkan, dari kebersihan tangan, pemakaian pelitup muka, penjarakan fizikal. Kesemuanya amat penting untuk pastikan pandemik ini dibendung.
Fokus kita sekarang adalah gelombang ketiga. Elakkan 3S, iaitu kawasan yang sesak, sempit dan juga bersembang pada jarak yang dekat. Berdisiplinlah kerana virus ini tidak mengira darjat, umur mahupun latar belakang anda. Tiada masa untuk kita berlengah lagi.
Kita sekarang telah memasuki gelombang ketiga COVID-19. Setiap langkah pencegahan perlu diamalkan dengan penuh tanggungjawab dan disiplin. Kita mampu meratakan lengkung pandemik ini. Semuanya di tangan kita bersama.
We've done great so far, but the fight is far from over. We need to be vigilant to keep ourselves and others safe. Wear a mask, wash your hands, and when you're out, keep a safe distance. In fighting this virus, we can't relax, so don't be lax.
The war on COVID-19 is not over. We should not take this lightly. Let us ensure all steps are taken to avoid the spread of the virus, be it social distancing, hand hygiene and wearing of the face mask. It's a new norm. Let's not slack. We can do this.
Perang COVID-19 masih belum berakhir. Pastikan kita sentiasa berdisiplin dalam mengelakkan 3S, iaitu kawasan yang sempit, sesak serta tidak sembang dalam jarak yang dekat. Mari kita sama-sama menjaga disiplin kita, hapus COVID-19.
COVID-19 is still out there. Let's do our part in following the SOPs in place so that we can break the transmission. Follow the 3 C's. Avoid close conversations, avoid crowded spaces, and avoid confined spaces. We can beat this together.
As we all know, the war against COVID-19 is still on. It is our responsibility to adhere to all the regulations set by our Ministry of Health. We are in the era of a new norm. Face masks, social distancing, and also hand hygiene are just basics. We can do this together, and let's not take it easy.
Kita telah lakukan yang terbaik setakat ini. Tetapi perjuangan kita masih belum selesai. Kita perlu berhati-hati untuk menjaga keselamatan diri bersama-sama. Pakailah pelitup muka, cuci tangan dan bila di luar, jaga jarak yang selamat. Dalam melawan wabak ini, jangan ambil mudah dan jangan alpa.
Seperti mana kita semua tahu, virus COVID-19 masih aktif. Sebagai peringatan, amalkanlah penjarakan sosial, kurangkanlah aktiviti kunjung pengunjung. Keluar bila ada urusan penting sahaja. Kita semua mampu melakukannya dengan disiplin yang tinggi.
Perang COVID-19 masih belum berakhir. Pastikan setiap langkah berjaga-jaga diamalkan, termasuk kebersihan tangan, pemakaian pelitup muka dan penjarakan sosial. Marilah kita sama-sama hapuskan virus ini sepenuhnya. Ayuh berdisiplin. Perang COVID-19 masih belum berakhir. Dalam kita berusaha memutuskan rantaian wabak ini, kita jangan terpedaya dengan virus maklumat palsu. Simak fakta melalui www.astroawani.com atau aplikasi Astro Awani. Teruskan berdisiplin, ratakan lengkungan pandemik ini.
The third wave of COVID-19 has taken us by storm. There's no room to take anything lightly. Everyone must follow all the steps to stop the spread of COVID-19. Social distancing, face mask, follow these steps, this SOP with the utmost discipline. Together, we can flatten the curve.
Perang COVID-19 tetap belum berakhir. Pastikan setiap langkah berjaga-jaga diamalkan, dari kebersihan tangan, pemakaian pelitup muka, penjarakan fizikal. Kesemuanya amat penting untuk pastikan pandemik ini dibendung.
Fokus kita sekarang adalah gelombang ketiga. Elakkan 3S, iaitu kawasan yang sesak, sempit dan juga bersembang pada jarak yang dekat. Berdisiplinlah kerana virus ini tidak mengira darjat, umur mahupun latar.
Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. I'm here with Sharaad Kuttan. Now, today millions of Americans will head to the polls in person, adding to their ballots to the already 100 million cast by early voters. While international attention is largely focused on the presidential race, US voters are also choosing new members of Congress. Does Republican Donald Trump have the power of incumbency on his side? and also has the COVID-19 pandemic given Democrat Joe Biden an unexpected boost to capture the all-important 270 Electoral College votes? Helping us think through some of these questions, we have Mohan Ambikaipaker. He is a Malaysian-based academic at Tulane University in New Orleans in the US, where he is an associate professor of critical race theory and post-colonial studies. Mohan, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Now, if I may begin with the early votes that have come in. Now, about 2/3 of the votes already cast have come in via mail-in ballots, and the rest of the voters showed up at the polling place to vote in person. Now, what this means is that more people have voted in advance of election day than on it. So why do you reckon there is such a high number of early votes? I mean, it seems to us, watching from the outside, that Americans really want to vote before election day.
Yes, this is an unprecedented showing for voting rates in U.S. Elections. Generally speaking, the presidential elections have the highest turnout of votes, but this is still very unprecedented in terms of the sheer volume of people who are casting their ballots and doing it under very strenuous circumstances, stressful circumstances because of the pandemic. I think there are two reasons. I mean, the first is, of course, the polarizing figure of Donald Trump. He has as much support as he has detractors, and in that sense, we're going to see where the balance tips this time around. And his polarizing style of politics has galvanized people, I would say, on both sides. People, on the one hand, believe that voters are motivated to vote because they cannot stand his leadership. But on the other hand, there are also pollsters who have been successful in predicting his success in the past, especially in 2016, who are also saying that the shy Trump voter, that means the Trump voters who are not very vocal, are themselves motivated to want to come out and vote. So we have, at least on a speculative level, two reasons.
Mohan, you're there in New Orleans. Could you help us understand the mood there? I mean, and in the state that you're in, where is the balance likely to fall? I mean, people are saying that this is an election of actually 50 states, or 51 states of America hold elections simultaneously. Tell us about New Orleans and the city and the state that it's in.
Well, I'm actually now speaking to you from Austin, Texas, because we had to evacuate in the aftermath of Hurricane Zeta, where almost 3/4 of the city of New Orleans lost power. So I am speaking to you from the battleground state of Texas, which is a lot more competitive than Louisiana. Austin and New Orleans both have similar features in that they are Democratic blue dots inside what are traditionally Republican-controlled states. But the key difference this time around between Texas and Louisiana, and Texas is a lot more consequential than Louisiana, because Louisiana is a small state with about a 5 million population, whereas Texas is much larger. It's one of the largest states with a lot of electoral college votes at stake. But Texas has become a minority-majority state in terms of demographics, and that is slowly being reflected in the changing voter composition as well. And so Texas has become far more competitive, and in fact, one of the most watched scenarios in American politics is if Texas is going to switch, which will be the first time in about 26 years that Democrats might have made headways. And a lot of the congressional races, as well as the U.S. Senate race with John Cornyn, is very competitive. And that's very unusual for a traditional stronghold like Texas, a traditional Republican stronghold like Texas. I would imagine that Louisiana, on the whole, is quite a safe state for Donald Trump. There has been no significant challenges and no changes in the demographic alignments that might have produced a similar swing. So I think Louisiana will be very safe for Donald Trump. Texas, on the other hand, is a key battleground state.
Okay, well, we're going to come back to scenarios in just a little bit, Mohan, but I do want to ask you, because you've written about racism and police violence in the West before, just how much does the Black Lives Matter protests feed into voter sentiment this time in this election?
I think it's playing a key role. Other than the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter protests and the questions around racism and policing is weighing very heavily, on the electorate. The figure of Donald Trump has been very bad for race relations in the last 4 years. It's certainly been a negative impact, I would say, and people are very motivated to want to remove him because, in a sense, he provides a lot of legitimacy to some of the most extreme racist forces and views in the country. He's still doing that, as you can see from the electioneering violence and issues that have cropped up in recent times. We had yesterday police in North Carolina pepper spraying black voters who were on their way to peacefully vote. And so these kinds of violences, including by the forces of the state, like the police, has been supported by the president, or given some kind of rhetorical pass and sanction rather than strenuous crackdown. So
but
it led to,
if I could interject, could you help us understand a little bit about how political parties work, and especially the Democratic Party that would have picked up on this, this revulsion towards Donald Trump? Have they been able to mobilize that part of their base? We talk about demographics, the black voter base, but I understand that black women voters are more likely to be mobilized than black male voters. I mean, how do we understand the way in which political parties work, and in this particular election, how will that play out?
Well, Donald Trump's appeal, is largely towards men, and white men voters are the key demographic group that have always supported Trump in the main. He has some, cross-racial support, not much, but some among Latinos and a little bit with regards to African American males. That is something that was quite recently shown. But as far as the minority group votes, African American, Latinos, Asian Americans, Donald Trump, is very much trailing in all of those groups. So in states where minority voters have a greater say, this is now a liability for Trump. I mean, he may capture some of the votes, but Republican candidates in the past, especially say in Texas, have always done well with conservative members of the Latino population. Certainly in Texas, that has been true. George W. Bush and gubernatorial candidates like Rick Perry have always done well with perhaps 1/3 to 40% of the Latino votes. The scenario would be quite different on the West Coast, where Latino voters are far more progressive or liberal, and I think it would be a harder inroad for Trump, in those states. But in the Deep South, he might have more cross-racial support, although I don't think it is at a significant level.
Right.
Not in a majoritarian level anyway.
Right. Mohan, we're going to take a quick break, but I'll have you stay on the line because there's still so much to discuss. We're going to come back after a couple minutes, so stay tuned to Consider This.
perang COVID-19 masih belum berakhir. Dalam kita berusaha memutuskan rantaian wabak ini, kita jangan terpedaya dengan virus maklumat palsu. Simak fakta melalui www.astroawani.com atau aplikasi Astro Awani. Teruskan berdisiplin, ratakan lengkungan pandemik ini.
The third wave of COVID-19 has taken us by storm. There's no room to take anything lightly. Everyone must follow all the steps to stop the spread of COVID-19. Social distancing, face mask, follow these steps, this SOP with the utmost discipline. Together, we can flatten the curve.
Perang COVID-19 tetap belum berakhir. Pastikan setiap langkah berjaga-jaga diamalkan, dari kebersihan tangan, pemakaian pelitup muka, penjarakan fizikal. Kesemuanya amat penting untuk pastikan pandemik ini dibendung.
Fokus kita sekarang adalah gelombang ketiga. Elakkan 3S, iaitu
Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. With me is Sharaad Kuttan. We're speaking to Mohan Ambikaipaker, who is a Malaysian academic at Tulane University in New Orleans in the US. Mohan, can I come back to the issue of the Trump administration and its management of the pandemic? How much do you think the perceived success or the perceived failures of the Trump administration in managing the COVID-19 pandemic in the US, how much is that going to play a role in terms for voters?
Well, I would say it's a polarized situation. Trump's handling of the pandemic has been pretty shoddy and incompetent, but the structural pressures in the U.S. Scenario, I think, aid him, because there is not much of a social safety net in the U.S., since many of the kinds of services that people depend on, including healthcare, are private, and there's not much of a social security net in terms of being unemployed and things of that nature. So the pressure to have an open economy and continue business as usual is strong, because people do not have the same recourse to public support in these moments of emergencies. For example, the way you have seen governments step in and help out people who are temporarily laid off or furloughed in the basic universal income, 70% of the last drawn check. Those kind of social security measures are not available in the U.S. political arena and its ideology. So there's a lot of pressure to then keep the economy open. So whether or not people may support Donald Trump, one of the reasons why his incompetent handling of the pandemic may not hurt him is because people are worried about being out of work and without a social security net.
Right.
Mohan, in different countries, of course, different things determine whether you support your government of the day. Is performance really important to the American voter? Because Donald Trump came into the presidency promising a 4% growth a year. He promised to reduce the deficit. On both scores, he failed. He has, and incomes did rise before the pandemic. That's one thing on his side. But is performance really the aperture through which Americans view the presidency in particular?
I think for Trump's supporters and even perhaps the independent voters who are undecided, with his style of politics, the main message is not about delivering on performance. That may be some of the claims he makes, and a lot of the claims are erroneous, but the style of politics that Donald Trump represents is something we are seeing across the globe right now, the rise of authoritarian, populist, and far-right political figures, who promise a particular kind of authenticity or style of charisma, and at the same time an identity politics that goes along with that charisma. So a very kind of racialized white nationalism has been galvanized in the United States, and that in itself is the message that he is promising a certain kind of racial order and preserving a certain kind of racial hierarchy. And so this is appealing, and we wait to see how much this outweighs some of the serious concerns around the handling of the public health crisis.
Right. Well, all eyes are going to be on the US. I think the whole world will be watching once we know what's happening in terms of the official results. Mohan, thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. We really appreciate you joining us and sharing your insights.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off the evening.
Thank you so much for watching, and good night.